Hey there, Jilly Darling here. You can find my website at jillydarling.com. That's Jilly. So today I just want to give you a little introduction on this podcast that I'm starting. And I want to let you know what kinds of things we're going to be talking about. I've spent the last 5 years, my little cat just came in to join me, so you might hear Yoda chattering and possibly purring. She's welcome everywhere that I am, so if she thinks her voice needs to be heard, I agree. So what I want to be talking about on this podcast has to do with the last 5 years of my life. Up until 2015, I lived a really normal, mundane life, and then everything changed. I had kind of a crisis that involved a breakdown of my physical body, my mental psyche, the way I process my emotions, and I had some pretty significant shifts spiritually. And I refer to it as the dark night of the ego. And it's what I went through back in 2015. And it took a couple of years to recover from that. And in some ways, I'm still learning how to navigate. As you might imagine, when you have a complete breakdown like that, when I actually refer to it as a Pluto cycle or the Phoenix cycle of life, death, and rebirth. And since then, I've kind of become a bit of a specialist in it because I've experienced the same thing multiple times since then. And that first time back in 2015 and 2016, it did last for, I don't know, maybe a year, really intensely. That first time was the most intense and the most pivotal. But I've experienced it multiple times since then. And it's a lot like what we're going through as a collective here in 2020. So I think it's really relevant, and that's why I want to start talking about it now. Before, it didn't feel quite so relevant. It seemed like something that happens to some people, but not everyone. And now we're all kind of going through it together. And I feel like I already did this. I'm really, really fortunate, and I don't want to diminish my own personal circumstances of how fortunate I've been during everything that's happened during 2020. But I do feel like, for me, it's been kind of a been there, done that thing, and it happened on a really intimate level, and now it's happening more on a collective level, which is a lot easier for me to practice non-attachment with. It still gets to me, don't get me wrong. But it's a lot more impersonal, which makes things easier to navigate. So what I'm going to be sharing with you is how I navigated it and how I coped with it. I'm going to be sharing with you some things. So as I stated before, I used to live a really traditional life. I had a day job and a nice house and a husband and all the things that the components of the traditional American dream. I had all those things in place, and it was like a light switch went off, and everything changed. And as I was navigating this breakdown back in 2015, all of the resources and coping abilities and all of the things that we do to take care of ourselves, all of those things stopped working pretty much all at once. My relationship stopped working. Nothing was working with my own self. So why would anything work with other people? That would be silly to expect. And I was in excruciating pain, like 24 hours a day. I wasn't getting relief during sleep. I was having night terrors and some really graphic dream stuff. And in hindsight, it's got all the components of a shamanic death. I don't call myself a shaman, but I've had that experience. So Western medicine failed me. It really didn't have anything to offer or anything to say that was even sort of helpful. And I was seeing a therapist. I've seen it. I really value therapy. I think it's really important. And it's been a useful tool for me, but it certainly hasn't been enough. I've needed a lot more than just therapy to heal myself from this. And I do identify as a wounded healer and a wounded teacher at this point. Everything in my life had to change, and I didn't know why or how or what to do, and there was no model that I knew of to look at. I didn't understand what was happening, and nobody that I talked to understood what was happening to me. And so I did the only thing I could. I looked inside myself, and I trusted my intuition, and I knew that I couldn't keep going financially or any other way, the way that I was going, because I couldn't work at that point. And I lost my disability almost immediately. So I had no income. And all I knew was that I had to put my body into the hot springs. Everything about me said I needed to spend as much time in the hot springs as I possibly could. And I'll share with you at some point about how I knew that. But it was my internal guidance system. And, the hot springs are spectacular, they exist at this place on the earth where there's like this thread that comes out from the core of the earth. This thread of water just emerges at the ground level where we walk, and it carries it's so mineral rich, and they're either detoxifying and sulfuric and kind of stinky. Those ones are stinky. They take away things from our body. They help us detoxify our body. Or they're these beautiful glacier waters that are just mineral rich, and they're dense with nutrients, and they're packed. They're so energizing. And there's cold springs, there's hot springs, there's warm springs. They're all different temperatures. But they come out right from the source of the earth. And there's something about that I really needed. And I didn't know how to make it work. So I had to invent a way that I could, for one thing, afford, given what resources that I had. And fortunately, I was in a position where I had some resources. And I'm also, by nature, I'm a Taurus. I'm very frugal, even though sometimes we get a reputation for lavish and decadent and things like that. I'm actually really good at self-restriction in some ways. So I thought, I'm going to call on those parts of myself that I'm already really good at, that I already know how to do, like my frugality. And I decided to buy a tent. I put all my stuff in storage. I gave up being a householder. I didn't have an address or anything like that at that point. And I bought a tent, even though I'd only slept in a tent maybe once or twice my whole life. And I moved into my little 2-seater convertible, which is super tiny and doesn't hold very much. And I decided I was going to live in a tent, and I was going to drive around and go to the hot springs and try and be far away from people and population density and thought forms. And I was going to put my body into the water, and I was going to sleep on the earth at night, and I was going to see what happened. And I was scared to death, and I took this risk that was, there was nothing rational to it. It was completely irrational leap of faith. And it's the best thing I've ever done in my life. It really is. Everything that is that matters to me now. Fast forward 5 years later in 2020, everything that's meaningful and important to me came out of that one choice, out of that one moment, out of my own desperation and necessity. And, I think 2020 reminds me of that experience that I had, where it's like you're standing at a cliff. Like in tarot, it's the Fool card, the 0 card, and it's this person, the Fool, who's standing at the cliff with a great big grin on their face, looking at a flower, and about to step right over the edge. And they don't even realize it, and they're just happy as could be. And I was not happy as could be when I made this choice because of all the pain and such. But, there's that fear of the unknown, that fear of taking that leap of faith, and that fear of not knowing if anything's going to catch you, or not knowing if you can catch yourself. I feel like that's the reality of it, is usually we catch ourselves, or we can learn to. And there's a great deal of empowerment in that. And there's a great deal of beauty in those moments just before we step over the edge, when maybe we can sense that this is happening. Maybe we know exactly that's what's happening. Maybe it's the only choice that we've got left. And maybe it doesn't even feel like a choice. It just feels like something that has to happen, or that is happening in spite of all of your refusals and rejections and all of your efforts to not let it happen, to change it. It just happens anyway. That's how it felt like for me when I went through that first big one. So what I'm going to be talking about on this podcast, everything that I'm going to be talking about on this podcast was informed by that experience. If I didn't have that experience, I wouldn't have any of these things to say to you. That's why I'm sharing a little about my background. I've actually been a full-time traveler the last 4 years, and I became a householder again in January of 2020. I rented an apartment with a 1-year lease out of what felt like no choice. I was having problems with my traveling, and it wasn't working anymore. And I told myself that I would continue traveling as long as I enjoyed it and I could finance it. And I stopped enjoying it, and financing it became harder and harder. And I got this apartment, and I think 45 days later, we went into lockdown for the quarantine, for the COVID-19 stuff. And I feel like that was another moment of divine guidance. And like for me, I'm kind of really good at decoding patterns and the way they play out in the material world, in the physical world of reality. So these are divine patterns, but they play out in our daily lives, right? So I'm really good at decoding this for myself, and I'm really good at decoding this for other people. So for example, anytime that something happens with a key, like if I lock my keys in the car, or a key breaks, or somebody else needs help finding a key, or I don't know how many times I've gone swimming and had my key stuck in my bathing suit, and then I lost it, and I had to go all the way back to my car before I realized that I lost it, and then I have to go back and swim and find it in the bottom of a river. I've done that so many times. So anytime something about physical keys that open things, that open doors, anytime something with a key happens, I know that there's something really important going on. That's one of my signs. So if I lose my key, I know that the universe is telling me to pay attention, because there's something possibly karmic, definitely archetypal. It's some kind of pattern is playing out, and it's going to be important. So it catches my attention. So that's one of the things we'll talk about a lot, and metaphors about archetypes. And I use a lot of metaphoric things, but these are metaphors that also exist in the real world. So I'm very focused on scooping out and reaching up and touching lessons from the divine, from the spiritual realm. But I'm really interested in how they play out in the material world, in the physical world, in physical form, because that's what we're here for. We have human bodies. Yes, we are spiritual beings with human bodies. And we need to work with these human bodies. We need to work with the physical realm. So I can go off and be totally blissed out in the spiritual world, and that's something I really enjoy doing. But if I can't bring that home and carry that into the physical world, where it can be manifest and made real and experienced physically, then it's kind of a waste of time in my eyes. It's kind of just a fantasy or a daydream, which can be really, really fun and really pleasant. But I'm really interested in what I'm here to do with this lifetime while I'm here on Earth. And I'm really interested in what you're here to do in this lifetime while you're here on Earth with these bodies. Another thing that I want to really be focusing on is the lessons that the Earth has taught me. This beautiful, beautiful planet that we live on. She is such an amazing place that we get to live. She, meaning the Earth. That's how I refer to her. I've developed quite an intimate relationship with the Earth. And I hope that you feel inspired to do something similar. We all have a relationship to her, even if we totally never think of her ever. It's easy to do. So in the last, 4 or 5 years, I've been sleeping on the Earth at night, gazing up at the stars, watching sunrises and sunsets. They're the highlight of my day. And I've been floating on waters, in the hot springs, and in the rivers and lakes, in the ocean. And I've developed this most rich relationship. And my attention is on the birds and the wildlife. And I've learned to speak different languages that are not centered around humans. And the Earth, sleeping on the Earth and cuddling up to her and putting my heart against the Earth. I learned to listen in a new way and in a different way. And she started talking to me. And she started telling me things and showing me things. And the birds, almost immediately, that first weekend, it was a weekend to camping. I was scared to death. I had no idea what I was doing. And I was freaked out to be in a little silk tent. And I was all by myself. And, a single woman traveling alone is a totally different experience than a single man traveling alone. I had completely different worries. Never once heard a man talk about the things that even understand me when I'm talking about the things that concern me compared to their own concerns. So I was scared to death this first weekend of camping, and the birds, I started watching the birds, and they were like screaming and squawking at me. I thought, what are these great big crows doing out here? Man, there's some massive crows around here. what's up with this? And there's hundreds of them. Well, a few weeks later, I found out those aren't crows. Those are ravens. And they're quite different than crows. And I watched them and I interacted with them. And they almost, it seemed like they came and sought, and they were seeking me out. And they taught me everything I need to know about how to be safe out in the middle of nowhere where there's no people around. They taught me how to read the signs in nature when there's a predator moving into the area. And I came to find out the signs aren't that different whether that predator is a human or an animal. And their own behavior taught me how to adjust my behavior depending on my circumstances. And I've had enough experiences with predators, both human and animals, to understand how to modify my behavior when interacting with them. When I lived in Canada, I encountered 26 bears in 2 weeks. There was a lot of black and brown and cinnamon bears, but there was also some grizzly bears with their little baby cubs who had just emerged from hibernation, and they were hungry. And I was able to spend time with them and be just fine and not intrude or encroach on them and just experience their energy and just share a moment with them. So those are the kinds of things that I want to be talking about. I want to talk about some of the ways that humans have become people, and in doing so, they become less animal, or not become. It's like when I refer to the difference between people and humans, is that people have lost their humanity, their animalness, we've forgotten that we're mammals too, and we're part of the animal kingdom. We're not exclusive from it. And the part of us that knows and understands that, I refer to as humans. That's our humanity. And I'm interested in the rehumanization of people. I would like to see the rehumanization of people. And I know that some of you listening are already there. I'm not trying to erase you, I promise. I'm trying to celebrate you. Mary Oliver has that beautiful poem called Wild Geese. And there's a line, I'm not getting it exactly right, but she's saying all these things you don't really need. And then she says, you only need to give the soft animal of your body what it longs for, what it really loves. And I think that's very much where I'm going, where I'm focused, where we're going to be talking about. I'm going to share with you the lessons that I learned from the earth about how I learned to give the soft animal of my body the things that it really loves and the things that it needs the most. How I've learned to shed away and let go of the things that used to serve me, and serve is kind of a strange word, but we'll use it. The things that used to serve me no longer do. And how to navigate identifying what those things are, and how to navigate releasing them from your life, and how to navigate those moments when you want to look back over your shoulder at the past and you long for the way things used to be because it made sense, or it was easy, or because there was more company, there was more people there, and people are fun. It's nice to be around people. So this is also about how to find out what's true for you and what's important for you. And to me, most importantly, is what is in harmony with the earth, what is sustainable for you in your life and for the planet. Because let's face it, anything that's not good for this planet is not going to be sustainable in the long run. And all you have to do is look outside, and you'll find proof very easily of that. You can live in a way that's disharmonious with the earth. You can do that. You can live in ways that are harmful to the earth and damaging to the earth. And you can live in ways that are harmful to yourself and damaging to yourself and the people around you. But you can't sustain it. At some point, something's going to break. And that's just, it's the self-correcting nature of the universe, certainly of this planet. So I highly respect and value the universal laws. They're also known as natural laws. They correspond with the 7 Hermetic principles. And we'll talk about that more. You don't worry about that too much now if you're not familiar. But this is about living in accordance with the earth and living in accordance with your own integrity. Another thing that we'll be talking about is the breath cycle. And if you're a meditator, you'll just have greater personal intimacy with this. But we've all been breathing our whole life. So we all have a great deal of personal intimacy with this. And I talk about the breath cycle in terms of expansion and contraction. And that's what we do. We alternate. We have periods of expansion and periods of contraction. And we take a pause in between. Sometimes that pause is harsh, and sometimes it's just a lovely quiet moment. Or it can feel like boredom. I mean, it is 2020. I don't know about you, but I've become very intimate with the experience of boredom this year, in spite of all the excitement we've had. What else? There's more. There's so much more, but we don't need to talk about everything today. So I'm just going to let this thing unfold. We'll talk about what I'm interested in. We'll talk about what you're interested in. Oh, feedback. I would love to get your feedback, and I'd love if you have any suggestions or adjustments, requests for adjustments that you'd like me to make. I would love to hear those, and I would love to have the opportunity to ask questions, because a lot of times, as I've kind of left the more mundane world, I feel like I have to ask a lot more questions than I used to understand what people are really getting at the core. So I would like to be able to do that. And I have a team of teachers that I work with that help me remain in integrity and to grow myself in places, especially where I have blind spots that I'm not aware of. I think we should all move towards getting a support team going, because the way, at least in these Western societies, I live in the USA. That's where my core experiences have unfolded, and I've traveled quite a bit, but that's still my primary perspective. And when we're in our blind spot and we need support. And the USA, the culture here does not tend to celebrate a person in need of support. There's a lot of cultures that share that sentiment. But, that's what we get to do. We get to make decisions for our own selves. That's the beauty of being a grown-up. That's the bright side of adulting. We get to make our own choices. And we get to find creative and beautiful ways to give ourselves resources and to notice that we have resources where maybe we didn't even realize. So yes, I welcome feedback. I would prefer it if you could go to my website and email me through my website so that we can have a dialogue, so that I can CC it to my teachers, so that I can implement these things if possible. And I won't be able to accommodate all requests, but I will certainly consider them. So if you'd like to support my work and promote my work, and follow my work, of course, click subscribe, like, comment, do all of those things, because that boosts my visibility, which for me, this is a business. So if I can have a sustainable business, then I can continue offering these resources for free. So that's kind of a win-win. And you can go to my website. Again, it's jillydarling.com. That's Jilly, darling, DARLING.com. And it's got links to all my social media accounts and so forth. And you can subscribe to my newsletter. I don't send a lot of newsletters, so I won't be bombarding your inbox. No need to worry about that. And I also have more vulnerable shares that I send out through my email list that I don't send on social media. It just feels better to do it that way sometimes. So I do suggest you subscribe to my newsletter. I think that's it for now. So I'm Jilly Darling. Check out my website at jillydarling.com. And until next time, stay in abundance.